By the late 1860s, there was one unexplored area in the continental United States. That was the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Today on Abbreviated Bios, we will look at the man who led the first expedition to successfully journey through the Grand Canyon, John Wesley Powell. John Wesley Powell was born to Joseph and Mary Powell on March 24, 1834, in Mount Morris, New York. His father was a Methodist preacher. John was tutored by John Crookham, who sparked Powell's interest in geology. Powell attended but did not graduate from Wheaton and Oberlin colleges. He eventually rejected his biblical upbringing and embraced the theory of evolution. Powell became interested in botany and joined the Illinois State Natural History Society in 1854. He traveled up and down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers observing and making botanical collections. He became the secretary of the Illinois Society of Natural History. John met his cousin Emma Dean in 1855 and married her in March of 1862. They would have one daughter together, Mary. In 1861, Powell joined the Union Army. He would become an artillery officer. At Shiloh in April 1862, Powell's battery was left in the rear. As the battle raged, Powell became impatient and led his battery into battle without orders. At the part of the battle known as the Hornet's Nest, Powell's battery fired volley after volley until he was shot in the arm late in the afternoon. Powell's right arm would have to be amputated, and he would be in constant pain the rest of his life. A few years later, he met a former Confederate who lost his left arm. Whenever each would buy a pair of gloves, they would send the unused one to the other. Powell stayed in the Army until January of 1865. He was discharged as a major. After leaving the Union Army, he became the curator of the Museum of the Illinois Normal University. It was in this capacity that he conceived of exploring the Green and Colorado rivers. Powell got a commission, and he and his 10 crewmen started on the journey down the Green River toward the Colorado and Grand Canyon on May 24, 1869. His crew were mostly brave mountain men along with Powell's brother Walter. None had any experience with whitewater rapids. The boats they had would never be used today on such a trip. They rode backwards into rapids, whereas today they would go forward. Early on, they lost half of their food when a boat capsized. They could find little game and were on starvation rations through most of the trip. The crew also portaged the boats throughout all the biggest rapids, which led to exhaustion. Powell, the leader, mainly mapped and took barometer readings from the top of the cliffs whenever they stopped to rest. With one arm, he was only a passenger as the other men did all the work. On one occasion, expedition members from 3 boats had to flee when the campfire that they had started to cook their food spread through the brush with the wind, and they had to get out of there fast. Another occasion, when Powell was getting barometer readings from the top of a cliff, he got stuck, and George Bradley had to climb up and take off his long johns and let them down and pull Powell up. As they passed over tougher and tougher rapids going into the Grand Canyon, 3 men decided to climb out and make their way to civilization. On their way to civilization, they would be murdered. Ironically, the rest of the crew made it out of the canyon on August 29, 1869, one day later. The trip made Powell famous and set him up for the rest of his career. Powell continued to explore the Colorado River region for the U.S. government. In 1878, he authored the Report on the Lands of the Arid Region of the United States. It advocated changing the public land system and to organize irrigation and pasturage systems. Powell contended that the West, with its lack of water, could not be settled and farmed like the Eastern U.S. His work was ignored until his observations became obvious during the Dust Bowl of the 1920s and 30s. Powell once said, "Gentlemen, you are piling up a heritage and conflict over water rights. for there is not sufficient water to supply the land. After the U.S. Geological Survey was established in 1879, Powell became its second director from 1881 to 1894. He pushed to have topographical maps made throughout the U.S. and studies of soil, groundwater, rivers, flood control, and irrigation. In 1888, due to many dry years, Powell authorized a study of arid regions to look for sites for dams and reservoirs. This survey led to the establishment of the Bureau of Reclamation that built many dams in the West. Powell resigned from the U.S. Geological Survey in 1894 due to ill health. Powell was also the director of the Bureau of Ethnology because of his research of Indians and their culture. He led that bureau from 1879 to the end of his life. In 1888, he was one of the founders of the National Geographic Society. John Wesley Powell died of a cerebral hemorrhage on September 23, 1902, in Haven, Maine. Because of his Civil War service, he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. John Wesley Powell was very important in American history. He established geographic science as part of the U.S. government. He made sure the entire United States was mapped. Powell also ensured that Indian culture was studied and recorded. Thank you for listening to Abbreviated Bios. If you like this sort of thing, please share it, give it a 5-star rating, and subscribe. Thank you for listening.